Welcome to SecOps, the podcast created by Ben, Moyes, and Sneh, and powered by Cyber Viewpoint.
We are so glad you could join us for this.
This is Cyber Viewpoint Originals, the podcast where we decode modern cybersecurity strategies and real-world defenses for today's digital world. This is the Practical Cybersecurity Series, where we cut through the noise and focus on what you can actually do. In Episode 4, we're tackling the reality most organizations are still catching up to. The office perimeter is gone. Your employees are working from kitchen tables, coffee shops, and hotel lobbies, and every one of those locations is a potential entry point for attackers. So how do you secure a workforce that's everywhere? That's what we're getting into today.
Yeah, and it's a massive shift. I mean, we are taking a deep dive into some heavy source material today, covering everything from NIST guidelines to zero trust frameworks, just to figure out how to operate in this new reality.
Right. Because right now, you, or maybe the employees you manage, might be listening to this from a corner table at a local coffee shop, sipping a latte connected to a public Wi-Fi network called something super generic like Cafe Guest.
Or they are sitting at their kitchen table, connected to the exact same router their internet service provider gave them in a cardboard box like 5 years ago.
Exactly. And what we're going to explore today is that your home router, or that cafe Wi-Fi, is essentially the front door to your corporate network. And it's a front door that your IT department has literally never seen.
They've never seen it, they never configured it, and they definitely cannot protect it. And that realization is, well, it's keeping security professionals awake at night.
I bet. Because we used to operate in a world with a really beautifully defined perimeter, right? Like a corporate firewall that acted like a massive moat and castle wall.
Yeah, keeping the bad guys out and the sensitive data safely inside. But our mission for this deep dive is to cut through all that noise. The traditional physical perimeter is completely obsolete now.
So let's unpack the baseline assumption we have to make now, according to the sources. The federal NIST guidelines on enterprise telework are pretty clear on this. State organizations have to assume external environments are inherently hostile.
Inherently hostile. Not just, unpredictable or a little risky.
Hostile, like an active war zone. Why do we have to start from such an extreme baseline?
Well, we have to start there because every single layer of physical security that an office building provides is just gone. Think about the physical infrastructure of a corporate headquarters.
Okay, yeah, you've got the badge scanner at the front door.
Right, and security cameras in the hallways.
Yeah.
You have enterprise-grade networking equipment locked inside a climate-controlled server room. And that room usually requires a separate key card or maybe even biometric access just to get the door open.
Yeah, it's a fortress.
But the moment you take a laptop holding sensitive corporate data and place it on a kitchen table, all of those physical safeguards just evaporate instantly. The hardware itself is suddenly way more prone to theft.
Like the classic scenario of someone literally grabbing a laptop bag from under a table at an airport while you're looking at the departure board.
Exactly. That physical risk is always there now. But the digital risk is honestly far more insidious. Because the communications between that remote laptop and your corporate servers are now traveling over totally unmanaged, unsecured networks.
We're talking about residential broadband, cellular networks, public Wi-Fi.
Which the NIST guidelines explicitly warn are highly susceptible to eavesdropping and man-in-the-middle attacks.
Oh, let's focus on that for a second. A man-in-the-middle attack. We hear that term thrown around a lot, but understanding how it actually works makes that whole hostile environment concept feel much more real.
It does. It's essentially an attacker intercepting the communication between two systems. They secretly listen in, or they can even alter the data while it's in transit.
So how does that look for the person sitting in the coffee shop? Or let's say a hotel lobby.
Okay, visualize sitting in a hotel lobby. You open your laptop and connect to the network named Hotel Guest Wi-Fi.
Pretty standard. I do that all the time.
Right, but you have no technical assurance that the router you just connected to is actually owned by the hotel.
Wait, really? But the name matches.
The name means nothing. An attacker could be sitting 3 couches away from you. They might be running a piece of hardware the size of a deck of cards that's broadcasting a stronger Wi-Fi signal with the exact same name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and your laptop's antenna naturally just gravitates to the stronger signal and connects. So suddenly, you aren't talking to the hotel's router at all. You are talking directly to the attacker's device.
So they literally sit in the middle.
Exactly. Every unencrypted email, every password you send over a weak protocol passes directly through their machine before they forward it along to the real internet. And you are completely unaware that your data was just harvested.
Here's what makes this so bizarre to me from a business logic standpoint. No sane executive would ever leave the physical front door of their corporate headquarters propped wide open overnight, right?
Never. They'd be fired.
We hire overnight security guards, we install alarm systems, but then we take a device containing the exact same sensitive intellectual property, client databases, financial projections, and we just casually connect it to a hotel network that 100 absolute strangers are also sharing.
It's completely counterintuitive.
If the network between the remote worker and the organization absolutely cannot be trusted, how do we even begin to function as a business?
Well, the unfortunate reality is that a lot of businesses are functioning on borrowed time right now, relying on outdated architectures. And it gets significantly more dangerous when we look at the specific risk of infected devices crossing physical boundaries.
The sources highlight this as a paramount threat. Let's walk through the scenario they laid out.
Okay, so a remote worker is using their corporate laptop on their home Wi-Fi. Now, let's say their home network is compromised.
Like they downloaded a virus?
Not even that. Perhaps they bought a cheap, unbranded smart light bulb or a smart TV that had a known vulnerability. An automated botnet finds it and infects their home router.
So the home network itself is compromised, but the corporate laptop is just sitting there connected to it.
Right. It connects. And the malware on the home network probes the laptop for vulnerabilities. It finds an unpatched application and silently infects the corporate machine. The user has absolutely no idea.
Because it happened in the background.
Exactly. Then, a few days later, that same employee drives into the corporate headquarters for a mandatory all-hands meeting.
Oh no, I see where this is going.
They walk right past the physical security guard, they swipe their ID badge at the turnstile, sit down at a hot desk, and plug that infected laptop directly into the corporate Ethernet port.
They just bypassed the $1 million firewall.
Completely bypassed it.
They physically carried the malware right through the front door, like a digital Trojan horse.
They bypassed every external perimeter defense the company has. The malware is now physically inside the trusted local area network. And from there, it can spread laterally to the servers, the databases, other employee workstations.
This is exactly why the sources say the perimeter is dead. Because this is so incredibly effective, sophisticated attackers have largely stopped trying to batter down the heavily fortified enterprise firewalls.
Why spend weeks trying to crack an enterprise-grade firewall when you can just wait for an employee to take their laptop home? They just attack the person sitting at the keyboard in their living room.
Which brings us to the human factor. The texts we have detailing social engineering and human hacking in a remote context are fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling.
They really are. But it makes perfect sense when you think about the psychology involved. Remote workers are the absolute prime targets for social engineering precisely because they're physically isolated.
Isolation is the attacker's greatest weapon because it completely removes peer verification.
Yes, peer verification is huge.
I was reading this section on peer verification in the source material, and the psychological dynamic clicked immediately for me. Think about the traditional office environment. You're sitting at your desk, and you get an urgent, highly unusual email supposedly from the IT department demanding you verify your password right now to avoid being locked out.
Yeah, what's your first instinct in an office?
You pop your head over the cubicle wall and ask your coworker, like, hey, did you just get a weird password reset email from IT?
And your coworker says, no, I didn't get anything. It's like a phishing scam.
Exactly. The attack is neutralized in 5 seconds through informal, immediate human interaction. You have a built-in safety net.
But when you are sitting alone at your kitchen table, balancing a spreadsheet on one monitor and, keeping an eye on a dog that's chewing the rug on the other,
you don't have that immediate reality check. You have to evaluate the legitimacy of that threat entirely on your own, often while under this artificial time pressure that the attacker created.
And the attackers leverage that pressure using multiple different vectors. I mean, we all know basic phishing, right? The generic emails with malicious links or fake invoice attachment.
Right, it's the stuff that usually goes to the spam folder.
Yeah, but the texts dive into the evolution of this. Spear phishing, which is highly targeted and personalized, vishing, which uses voice communication over the phone, and smishing, which targets the victim via SMS text messages.
The explosion of vishing and smishing is directly correlated to the smartphone becoming our primary work device, isn't it?
Absolutely. The texts highlight specific smishing campaigns where the attacker mass texts a terrifyingly plausible alert. It might say, your payroll deposit has been suspended due to suspicious activity. Click here to verify your identity.
Oh, that would make my heart drop.
That's the point. The link will be slightly obfuscated, maybe using a 0 instead of an O, or a subtle misspelling of the company name. But if you are rushing, reading it on a tiny screen, the physiological response kicked in.
The panic over not getting paid completely overrides your critical thinking. You just click.
You click. But the phishing case studies, the voice phishing, are what truly showcase the sophisticated manipulation at play here.
Yeah, there is a specific attack detailed in the source material dubbed francophoning, originally named because it heavily targeted organizations based in France. It is an absolute masterclass in how attackers layer these vectors to completely overwhelm the target's skepticism.
The francophoning methodology relies entirely on cognitive overload. It begins with a seemingly innocuous email. An administrative assistant receives an email with an attachment labeled as an overdue invoice or maybe a confidential legal document.
And the email is designed to be slightly confusing, right? It requires clarification.
Yes. So the target is sitting there looking at the email, trying to figure out what it is. And before they even have time to forward it to the security team or ask a supervisor, the phone rings.
The timing is critical.
It's everything. The phone rings, and the person on the other end introduces themselves as a vice president or a senior executive within the company. They sound rushed, authoritative, and very impatient.
Oh, that's so manipulative.
They immediately reference the email that arrived 30 seconds ago, asking, "Did you receive the invoice I just forwarded?"
Which immediately creates a false sense of legitimacy because the caller knows about the email.
Exactly. They use their assumed authority to pressure the assistant into bypassing standard protocols. They demand they open the file immediately or process a wire transfer to resolve this fake crisis.
It's like a wolf in a suit that your employee just politely held the door open for. The attacker is weaponizing our natural, ingrained human instinct to obey authority figures and to be helpful to our colleagues.
The psychological manipulation is incredibly sharp, and the financial devastation caused by these manipulations is just immense. The texts cite data from the FBI detailing a highly lucrative trend called payroll diversion.
This one blew my mind because this isn't about stealing corporate secrets. It's about pure, liquid cash extraction.
Yes. The criminals use these phishing or vishing techniques to steal an employee's login credentials for the corporate network. Once inside, they navigate directly to the human resources or payroll self-service portal.
And what's devious here is they don't change the password to lock the employee out.
No, because that would immediately trigger an alarm.
Right. They just quietly alter the routing data.
They leave everything looking perfectly normal. They simply update the direct deposit information, changing the bank account and routing numbers, so that the employee's next paycheck is diverted into an account controlled by the attacker.
Which is often a prepaid debit card that can be quickly liquidated.
Exactly. The FBI tracked dozens of these cases in a very short window, identifying massive losses. And what's vital to understand is that they are not just targeting multinational banks or tech giants.
No, they are targeting universities, local municipal school districts, healthcare facilities, commercial airlines.
It's an equal opportunity victimizer. If you have a payroll system, you are a target.
And speaking of equal opportunity, the sources detail how these syndicates recruit unsuspecting everyday people to help them launder this stolen money through work-at-home scams.
This represents the darkest intersection of cybercrime and human desperation, I think. Attackers actively target demographics looking for flexible income. College students, stay-at-home parents, retirees.
They post incredibly professional-looking job advertisements for remote roles, like a payment processing clerk or local financial representative for a fictitious overseas company.
And when someone gets the quote-unquote job, they unknowingly become a money mule.
So the scam operates by routing the stolen payroll funds we just discussed into the new employee's personal checking account, right?
Yes. The attacker tells the victim, "We are transferring our client's funds to your account for local processing. Keep 10% as your salary and immediately wire the remaining 90% to our overseas supplier."
So by the time the FBI or the local police trace the stolen payroll funds, the trail leads directly to a stay-at-home parent who thought they had a legitimate data entry job. Meanwhile, the actual criminals have already moved the money offshore via non-reversible wire transfers.
The victim is left holding the bag, completely devastated and often facing real legal consequences or massive bank debts.
It's terrible.
It is. Furthermore, the texts point out how attackers target the elderly with sophisticated tech support scams. They initiate unsolicited phone calls, posing as senior technicians from Apple, Microsoft, or major antivirus vendors.
They utilize fear, claiming the victim's machine is actively transmitting a virus.
Exactly. They patiently guide the terrified victim through the process of installing remote desktop software, granting the attacker total control of the machine.
And once inside, they steal financial documents, deploy ransomware, and audaciously demand the victim read them their credit card number to pay for the virus removal service.
Let me push back on this for a second because I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now. If my phone rings and the caller ID clearly says Microsoft Support or Apple Inc., why shouldn't I trust it? It's printed right there on my screen, verified by my telecom provider. That assumption is precisely what makes phishing so successful. But the technical reality is that caller ID is a fundamentally broken and insecure protocol.
The sources make it emphatically clear. You cannot rely on caller ID to authenticate a caller.
Not at all. Cyber criminals utilize voice over IP or VoIP services and SIP trunking to engage in number spoofing. It requires almost zero technical skill to program the outgoing caller ID metadata to display any alphanumeric string and any 10-digit phone number they choose.
So it will literally say Microsoft Support and display a familiar area code, but the call is actually originating from a boiler room operation on another continent.
Exactly. The technical mechanics of that are terrifying, but it's the truth. So the hard and fast rule is, if you receive an unscheduled, unsolicited phone call from someone claiming to be tech support, a bank fraud department, or a government agency, you hang up.
You find the official number on their public website and you dial them yourself.
Always initiate the connection yourself. But we also have to recognize that attackers aren't just making blind phone calls anymore. The most chilling part of the hybrid work threat landscape is how much reconnaissance they do.
The sources detail how threat actors actively monitor corporate job boards and platforms like CareerBuilder.
This is the part that most standard corporate policies completely miss. If an attacker wants to breach a specific company, they don't just send 1,000 generic emails and cross their fingers. They look to see who the company is actively trying to hire.
Let's say your organization posts a job opening for a senior financial analyst. The attackers see this. They research your corporate structure, usually via LinkedIn, to identify the hiring manager or the internal HR recruiters.
Then they craft a highly sophisticated, perfectly tailored, malicious payload disguised as a resume. They send an email directly to the recruiter referencing the exact job requisition number, expressing enthusiasm to the role, and attaching a PDF or a Word document that appears to be a flawlessly formatted resume.
And the HR representative's entire professional responsibility is to open attachments from strangers. It's literally their job to click the file.
It is. And the moment they open that PDF, hidden macros or zero-day exploits execute in the background. Game over.
Game over. The initial foothold is established. This is why the sources stress the critical importance of continuous specialized training. You have to run mock phishing and vishing simulations.
You really do. The text mentioned platforms like PhishGuru, which allow organizations to send safe, simulated attacks to their own employees.
And what's great is when an employee clicks a simulated malicious link, it doesn't just record a failure on some spreadsheet, it immediately creates a teachable moment. It displays a brief training module explaining the exact red flags they missed.
Like the spoofed sender address or the artificial sense of urgency, you have to train the human.
But if attackers are dedicating this much time, psychology, and technology to tricking humans into handing over the keys to the corporate kingdom, our next logical defensive step is to make those keys incredibly difficult to use, even if they are stolen.
Exactly. If the firewall is dead, identity is the new firewall.
So let's talk about the mechanics of identity. To really understand identity security, we have to distinctly separate two concepts that people frequently conflate: authentication and authorization.
This is a crucial distinction. Let's break it down. Authentication is the process of proving who you are. It is the system verifying your claimed identity.
Okay.
Authorization is determining what you are allowed to do once your identity has been successfully authenticated.
Think of a highly secure physical building. When you show your government ID to the security guard at the front desk and they verify your face matches the photo, that is authentication. You have proven who you are.
Right. But if your visitor badge only opens the doors to the main lobby and the cafeteria and sounds an alarm if you try to open the door to the server room, that is authorization.
I'm authenticated to be in the building, but I'm not authorized to touch the servers. Understood. So for proving who I am authentication, Why do the sources state so definitively that passwords are dead? Because, we still use them hundreds of times a day.
We do, but passwords are a catastrophic single point of failure because they are static secrets. If an attacker acquires your password, whether they trick you into typing it into a fake website, extract it using a keystroke logger, or simply purchase it on the dark web after a major data breach,
The authentication system has absolutely no way of distinguishing the attacker from you.
none. If the attacker has the secret string of characters, the system assumes they are you. This is why the texts highlight multi-factor authentication, or MFA, as the single most impactful security control an organization can deploy for a remote workforce.
Multi-factor authentication. We see this everywhere now. It's the prompt that asks for a code after you've already entered your password.
Yeah, it forces the authentication process to rely on more than just a single dimension. It requires a combination of distinct factors, something you know like the password, something you have like a physical smartphone or a hardware token, and something you are, like a biometric marker such as a fingerprint.
So if an attacker steals your password, but they are sitting in a basement in another country and do not physically possess your smartphone to receive the secondary code, the authentication fails.
It fails completely. But here is where we need to dive deep because the sources are incredibly nuanced here. MFA is not a silver bullet, and not all MFA is created equal.
In fact, some forms of MFA are currently being exploited at scale. Let's examine SMS-based MFA. These are the text messages containing a 6-digit code that your bank or your email provider sends to your phone. Why do the federal guidelines recommend phasing this out?
SMS-based authentication is fundamentally flawed because it relies on the security of the cellular telecom network, which was never designed for identity verification. It is highly vulnerable to an attack known as SIM jacking or SIM swapping.
I read the technical breakdown of SIM jacking in the source material, and it is a fascinating low-tech bypass of a high-tech system. Walk us through how it works.
Well, in a SIM jacking scenario, the attacker doesn't try to hack your phone directly at all. Instead, they attack the human customer service representative at your cellular provider.
The human factor again.
Always. The attacker gathers basic background information about you. Perhaps your home address, your date of birth, and the last 4 digits of your social security number, all of which are easily found in public data brokers or previous breaches.
Then what?
The attacker calls the telecom provider, impersonates you, and claims they lost their phone while traveling and urgently need their phone number ported over to a new SIM card.
And the new SIM card is sitting inside a burner phone that the attacker is literally holding in their hand.
Precisely. If the social engineering is successful, the customer service rep hits a button and your phone number is instantly transferred to the attacker's device.
So you, sitting at home, might just notice that your phone suddenly says no service, which most people assume is just a temporary glitch.
Right, you might restart your phone thinking it's a bug. Meanwhile, the attacker goes to your online bank, enters your stolen password, and the bank dutifully sends the secure 6-digit MFA text message.
Jack straight to the attacker's burner phone. They read the code, type it in, and empty the account.
But telecom infrastructure routed the secure code directly to the threat actor. This is why the industry is aggressively moving away from SMS.
Okay, so if SMS is fundamentally insecure because of the telecom layer, what about push notifications? This is the method where you type your password on your laptop and the app on your smartphone just pops up and says, "Are you trying to log in?" Tap yes or no. It bypasses the cellular SMS system completely. That seems both highly secure and incredibly convenient.
It is significantly better than SMS because the communication happens over an encrypted internet channel tied to the specific hardware of the device, not just the phone number. However, attackers have found a psychological vulnerability in this system known as MFA fatigue or MFA bombing.
MFA fatigue. Let's look at the mechanics of this because it's wild.
It weaponizes human annoyance. Imagine an attacker has purchased your corporate password on the dark web. They attempt to log into your corporate VPN at 2:00 a.m. your local time.
So you're dead asleep.
Yeah. Your phone on your nightstand buzzes with a push notification asking for approval. You wake up confused, realize you weren't trying to log in, and you tap.
No. A normal person goes back to sleep.
But the attacker immediately tries to log in again. Your phone buzzes a second time. You tap. No again. Perhaps a bit frustrated.
Okay, now I'm annoyed.
At this point, the attacker runs an automated script that attempts to log in every 3 seconds. Your phone buzzes. No. Buzzes again. No. Buzz, buzz, buzz. They send 60 push notifications in a span of 3 minutes.
That would drive anyone crazy.
And eventually, out of sheer exhaustion, extreme annoyance, or simply by accidentally tapping the wrong side of the glass screen while fumbling to silence the phone in the dark, you hit yes.
So the moment you hit yes, the attacker is granted full access. They spam the system until human error lets them in.
Exactly. So, if SMS text messages can be hijacked via the telecom provider and push notifications can be weaponized into psychological fatigue attacks, what is the everyday remote worker actually supposed to use to secure their accounts?
The texts point to the adoption of FIDO2 standards, specifically utilizing authenticator apps and hardware security keys.
Yes. An authenticator app like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator generates a time-based, rotating 6-digit code locally on the device itself.
It does not rely on a cellular signal or an internet connection to receive the code, meaning it cannot be intercepted in transit like an SMS message, and you cannot be spammed with push requests. You have to actively open the app and read the code.
And for even higher security, especially for IT administrators, the standard is physical hardware keys.
Like a UBT.
Yes, like a YubiKey. These are small USB or NFC devices that you carry on your keychain. To authenticate, you must physically plug the key into the laptop or tap it against the back of your phone.
They use public key cryptography and are considered highly phishing resistant because the cryptographic trust relationship is bound to the physical hardware. Even if an attacker tricks you into going to a fake website and you plug in your key, the key itself recognizes that the domain is fraudulent and will refuse to authenticate.
It's a fantastic defense.
That brings us to the third factor, biometrics. Fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scanners. The texts refer to this as the wave of the future, and it's heavily marketed to consumers as the ultimate frictionless security.
You don't have to memorize a complex password. You don't have to carry a USB key. You just look at the camera and you are in.
But the sources also explore the dark side of biometrics, and the implications here require serious consideration.
It is a profound risk profile that organizations must understand before implementing biometric systems globally. The text uses the infamous 2015 breach of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, the OPM breach, as a critical case study here.
I remember that one.
In that catastrophic event, threat actors infiltrated the government database and stole millions of records, including the highly detailed fingerprint data of over 5 million federal employees and contractors.
And here's the fundamental problem. If a password is stolen in a database breach, you just force a global password reset. The old password is useless. If an employee loses their physical hardware token on the subway, the IT department instantly revokes that token's serial number, rendering it inert.
But if your biometric data is stolen,
you cannot change your fingerprint. You cannot issue an employee a new retina or a new voice print.
Exactly. Because biometric markers are indelible physical characteristics, if a highly sophisticated threat actor steals the raw biometric data and figures out how to spoof the sensors, they potentially own that individual's identity forever. It is an unchangeable authentication factor.
So how did the text suggest we balance the incredible convenience of biometrics with the permanent risk of compromise?
The solution lies in architectural design, specifically localized storage. The best practice is to never transmit or store raw biometric data on a centralized corporate server.
So where does it go?
The biometric data should be stored locally, heavily encrypted, within a secure hardware enclave on the specific device itself, such as the secure enclave on an iPhone or the TPM chip used by Windows.
Hello. So the fingerprint never actually leaves the phone.
Exactly. When you touch the sensor, the phone internally verifies that your finger matches the stored template. The phone then sends a cryptographic yes signal to the corporate server. If the corporate server gets breached, the attackers only get the yes signals, not the actual fingerprints.
That makes total sense. We have spent a lot of time on identity, but that highly secure multi-factored identity is always accessing the network through a physical device, which means we need to talk about the hardware itself.
Yeah, this gets messy.
What happens when an employee uses a highly secure hardware token-backed identity to log into the corporate network, but they are doing it from a personal iPad that they share with their toddler, who routinely clicks on every flashy pop-up ad on gaming websites?
This introduces the absolute nightmare scenario for enterprise security architecture. BYOD, or bring your own device.
The boundary between personal digital life and professional digital life has entirely collapsed. I was trying to think of an analogy for the risk of mixing personal and corporate data on the same unmanaged operating system. It is essentially like deciding to wash your mud-soaked gym clothes in the exact same washing machine cycle as your dry, clean-only silk suits.
That analogy perfectly captures the cross-contamination risk. Let's examine the vulnerabilities of a personal device as outlined in the NIST guidelines. First, a personal device lacks any corporate governance. The IT department has zero visibility into the device's health. They don't know if the operating system is missing critical security patches, or if the antivirus software was disabled a year ago to make a video game run faster. Furthermore, the user almost certainly operates the device with full local administrative rights.
Meaning they have the power to install whatever they want.
Yes. And it means that any malware they accidentally trigger via a phishing email or a malicious website also inherits those full administrative rights, allowing it to embed itself deeply into the operating system. Combine that unmanaged device with the reality that it is operating on an unsecure home Wi-Fi network.
We touched on this briefly, but let's go deeper. Home networks are notoriously vulnerable. People buy a router, plug it in, and never touch the administration panel again.
They rarely update the router's firmware, leaving known vulnerabilities unpatched for years. Worse, they often leave the default administrative credentials active, usually something as simple as admin for the username and password for the password.
And automated scanning bots constantly scour the internet for these default credentials. Once an attacker gains control of the home router, they can manipulate the DNS settings to redirect traffic or perform the man-in-the-middle attacks we discussed earlier, intercepting all the data flowing from the BIOD device.
And the NIST guidelines point out a particularly dangerous consequence of a compromised BIOD device connecting to the enterprise. If that personal laptop is infected with a remote access Trojan and the employee logs into the corporate network, the malicious traffic generated by the attacker using that laptop looks to the corporate firewalls and monitoring tools like it is coming from the organization itself.
It appears as legitimate corporate traffic because it is originating from an authenticated user's device, traversing an authorized connection tunnel. The monitoring tools see John from accounting's laptop requesting database access, which looks perfectly normal, when in reality it is the malware executing the request.
This is why the NIST guidelines take a very hard line on physical BYOD connections. They strongly recommend that if an employee brings a personal device into the physical office building, that device must be isolated on a separate, dedicated external network, essentially a guest network that sits entirely outside the corporate DMZ.
It's quarantined. It should not be granted any more access to internal enterprise resources than the user would have if they were dialing in remotely from a public library.
Precisely. But that addresses the physical office. What about when they are working from home or a coffee shop? How do organizations mitigate the risk of an employee using their personal smartphone to check corporate emails or access client documents?
This is where the texts introduce MDM, Mobile Device Management, and MAM, Mobile Application Management. And understanding the mechanical difference between these two is vital for any organization trying to respect employee privacy while securing data.
MDM is the traditional approach. It involves installing a profile on the device that grants the corporate IT department sweeping control over the entire operating system. The organization can enforce strict password policies, mandate device-level encryption, prevent the user from installing unauthorized apps, and track the device's physical location.
Which is perfectly fine for a corporate-owned laptop. But if you tell an employee they have to install MDM on the personal iPhone they bought with their own money, they are going to push back hard. Nobody wants their employer to have the technical capability to accidentally or intentionally wipe their entire phone, deleting years of family photos and personal text messages.
The privacy concerns are massive, which is why user adoption of MDM on BYOB devices is historically abysmal. This is why the sources point to MAM, Mobile Application Management, as the superior architectural choice for personal devices.
Let's use an analogy for MAM. Think of the personal smartphone as a foreign country. The IT department has no jurisdiction there. But MAM acts like a diplomat's secure briefcase. The foreign country, the personal phone, can transport the briefcase, but it does not have the cryptographic key to open it.
That's a highly accurate description.
Yeah.
MAM does not attempt to control the entire device. Instead, it creates a heavily encrypted, mathematically isolated sandbox or container on the device. The corporate email client, the corporate chat applications, and the corporate document viewers are installed exclusively inside this secure container.
So it creates a hard barrier between the gym clothes and the silk suits.
Yes. The IT department has total administrative control only over what happens inside the secure briefcase. They can dictate that data cannot be copied and pasted from the corporate email app into the user's personal social media apps. They can mandate that the container requires a separate PIN or biometric check to open.
And most importantly, if the employee leaves the company or the phone is lost, the IT department can send a remote kill command that instantly cryptographically shreds the corporate container, destroying the sensitive data without ever touching, or even having the ability to see the user's personal photos or applications.
It's the best of both worlds.
But what about the small businesses? I hear this advice constantly in startup circles and smaller organizations. They say, we don't have the budget or the technical expertise to configure sandboxed MAM environments. We just give our employees a link to download the corporate VPN client and tell them to install it on whatever personal laptop they have at home. I want to push back on this heavily based on our reading. Is quote-unquote just install the VPN on your personal laptop an actual viable security strategy?
It is arguably one of the most dangerous configurations an organization can deploy. Installing a traditional VPN client on an unmanaged, potentially compromised personal device is essentially building a paved, high-speed highway straight past your firewalls and into the heart of your corporate network.
And understanding why that is so dangerous requires us to look at the architecture of the VPN itself. The texts are unequivocal on this. Traditional virtual private networks are fundamentally flawed for the realities of modern distributed work.
To understand the flaw, we have to look at the foundational architecture of a VPN, which relies on the moat and castle perimeter model we discussed earlier.
Right. The corporate network is the highly trusted castle. It is surrounded by a deep moat, which is the enterprise firewall. If your IP address originates from outside the moat, you are considered untrusted traffic and are blocked. If you are inside the castle walls, you are considered trusted traffic and can move relatively freely.
Yeah, a VPN is essentially a digital drawbridge. You authenticate at the gate, the drawbridge lowers, and your remote device is granted a secure tunnel that places it virtually inside the castle walls.
And once you are inside, you receive an internal IP address. You are treated by the network as if you are physically sitting at a desk in the headquarters.
And here's why that broad access is a total disaster. Using a traditional VPN is like checking a visitor's ID at the front door of a high-security museum, verifying their ticket, and then letting them wander completely alone, unsupervised, into the subterranean vault where all the priceless diamonds are kept, with no security cameras watching their specific movements.
That is the exact vulnerability of implicit trust. A VPN grants broad network access. If an attacker manages to steal one single employee's credential, perhaps through that MFA fatigue attack we discussed, and logs into the VPN, the damage is not contained to just that one user's email inbox.
Because the VPN grants them an internal IP address, the attacker can move laterally across the entire corporate network. They can quietly scan the network for vulnerable internal servers, access poorly secured shared drives containing proprietary data, and strategically deploy ransomware across hundreds of machines simultaneously.
The sources also specifically call out native remote access protocols like RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, and SSH. IT teams have historically loved these protocols because they are built directly into the operating systems, they require no additional licensing fees, and they just work.
But security teams view them as massive liabilities. When an IT administrator exposes RDP directly to the public internet to allow remote workers to log into their office desktops, they are essentially leaving a ground floor window wide open.
These protocols are highly vulnerable to brute force password guessing attacks, aren't they?
Absolutely. Furthermore, if a vulnerability is discovered in the RDP protocol itself, attackers can use automated tools like Shodan to scan the entire internet, find every exposed RDP port, and launch wormable exploits that compromise the machine without even needing a password. They should never be exposed directly to the hostile internet without a secure intermediary authentication layer.
So, if VPNs grant too much lateral movement and native protocols like RDP are too vulnerable to expose, what is the alternative architecture? The sources point entirely away from legacy VPNs and heavily emphasize the adoption of ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access.
Zero Trust represents a complete paradigm shift in how we think about networking. It discards the moat and castle model entirely. Going back to your museum analogy, Zero Trust is the equivalent of treating every single visitor like an absolute stranger, even if that visitor happens to be the CEO of the museum, at every single exhibit, every single time they stop to look at a painting.
Trust no one, verify everything. It's a great mantra, but how does it work mechanistically?
A zero-trust architecture assumes that the network itself, whether it's the home Wi-Fi, the public internet, or even the physical corporate LAN, is already compromised. It operates on the principle of continuous real-time behavioral and contextual analysis. In a traditional VPN, you authenticate once at the beginning of the day, and you are trusted for the next 8 hours.
But under ZTNA, for every single access request or new session, the system evaluates a complex matrix of conditions.
So it's constantly checking the VIP list. First, it heavily scrutinizes the identity of the user, requiring strong MFA. Second, it verifies their role and permissions. Is this specific user authorized to see this specific application? Third, and this is where it dramatically outperforms a VPN, it verifies the device health context.
The device health, this is the game changer.
Yes. The ZTNA policy engine checks the posture of the device requesting access. Is the operating system fully patched? Is the corporate antivirus active and updated? Is the request coming from an IP address in a country where the organization actually does business? Or is it an impossible travel scenario where the user logged in from New York an hour ago and is now requesting access from Eastern Europe?
And if all those conditions are perfectly met, what happens next? Because it doesn't just drop them onto the network like a VPN does, right?
Exactly. This is the concept of microsegmentation. If the context is approved, the ZTNA solution dynamically creates a secure, encrypted tunnel, often called a tunnel of one, connecting the user's device to only that specific application. It does not grant access to the underlying network.
So if an attacker steals a credential and even manages to bypass the MFA, but they are trying to log in using an unrecognized, unpatched laptop, the Zero Trust engine blocks the connection immediately because the device posture fails.
And even if they somehow spoofed the device health, they don't get dropped onto the broad corporate network to scan for vulnerabilities and spread ransomware. They are rigidly confined to only interacting with the single application that the compromised user was authorized to see. The blast radius of a breach is contained to a microscopic level.
The security benefits are immense, but what often surprises organizations is that Zero Trust, when implemented correctly, actually improves the end-user experience.
I know in cybersecurity, there is almost always an inverse relationship between security and convenience. More security usually means more friction and more headaches for the user.
But consider a modern enterprise environment where resources are highly distributed. An organization might have legacy databases in a physical data center, computing workloads in AWS, and virtual machines in Microsoft Azure. With a traditional VPN setup, a user might have to constantly log in and out of different clients, disconnecting from the data center VPN so they can connect to the AWS VPN to reach a different tool. It's frustrating and inefficient.
With Zero Trust, the architecture utilizes a centralized policy engine and identity provider. The user simply opens a web portal or an application menu and clicks the resource they need. The ZTNA broker evaluates the context in milliseconds and seamlessly routes them to the right place securely in the background, regardless of where that resource physically lives.
The user just sees their tools, they don't have to manage the networking. The sources also discuss a fascinating defensive benefit of ZTNA called cloaking. How does the network make itself invisible?
With a traditional VPN or an exposed RDP server, the gateway sits on the edge of the corporate network, actively listening for incoming connection attempts. Because it is listening, anyone scanning the internet can see it, identify the software version, and attempt to attack it. Zero Trust architectures often invert this model using outbound-only connections. The protected internal application establishes an outbound connection to a centralized cloud broker.
So the server reaches out to the cloud rather than waiting for the internet to reach in.
Yes. Because the connection is outbound, the internal application does not need to open any listening ports to the public internet. To an unauthorized scanner or an automated botnet probing the internet for targets, the network entry point simply does not exist. It drops all unauthenticated packets silently. The infrastructure is completely cloaked from the outside world.
So if you are an IT leader listening to this, the mandate is clear. Stop relying on broad moat and castle VPNs that expose your network to lateral movement. Begin the transition to granular, context-aware Zero Trust network access.
But we must recognize that Zero Trust primarily handles how we securely access our applications and data. We also have to address where that data is actually residing. Because for a remote workforce, the vast majority of that data is no longer sitting on servers in a corporate basement, it is hosted in the cloud.
And that reality introduces entirely new attack vectors. We need to explore cloud security and the concept of the shared responsibility model. First, we need to clarify the fundamental architecture of the cloud, because the cloud is just a marketing term for someone else's computer. The texts break this down into three primary deployment models: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS.
Understanding these acronyms is essential for determining your security posture. IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service. Think of Amazon Web Services EC2 instances or Microsoft Azure virtual machines. In this model, you are essentially renting raw computing power, the bare virtual servers, the storage drives, and the networking infrastructure. You're responsible for installing the operating system, patching it, and installing your applications.
Then you have PaaS, or Platform as a Service.
Think of Google App Engine or AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Here, the cloud provider manages the underlying infrastructure and the operating system environment. They hand you a fully functioning platform. Your developers simply deploy their proprietary code and applications onto it without worrying about server maintenance.
And finally, SaaS, or Software as a Service. This is what the vast majority of remote workers interact with daily.
SaaS includes platforms like Salesforce, Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, or Slack. The provider manages everything: the servers, the operating system, the application code, and the databases. You simply open a web browser, log in, and use the finished software.
The most critical concept discussed in all the cloud security manuals we reviewed is the shared responsibility model. If there is one concept regarding cloud architecture that must be understood, it is this dividing line.
The shared responsibility model defines exactly what the massive cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, are legally and operationally responsible for securing, and what you, the customer, are responsible for securing. And many organizations get breached because they fundamentally misunderstand where this line is drawn.
Let's use an analogy. The shared responsibility model is like renting a luxury apartment in a high-rise building. The landlord, the cloud provider, is responsible for the security of the building itself. They secure the concrete foundation, they maintain the electronic locks on the main lobby doors, they hire the security guard at the front desk, and they ensure the elevators and plumbing work.
That is the perfect analogy for security of the cloud. The provider is responsible for the physical security of their massive data centers. You cannot physically walk into an AWS facility. They handle the host server hardware, the industrial cooling systems, the physical networking cables, and the hypervisor virtualization layer. They guarantee the infrastructure is sound.
But as the tenant, you are responsible for the security inside your specific apartment. If you decide to leave your front door wide open, prop a window open on the fire escape, and leave your jewelry on the kitchen counter, and someone walks in and steals it, you cannot sue the landlord for a security failure.
Exactly. You are responsible for security in the cloud. This means you, the customer, are entirely responsible for managing the identities of your users, enforcing MFA, securing the endpoints that access the data, configuring the network firewalls within your virtual environment, and encrypting the sensitive data itself.
Let me play devil's advocate here, because this is a common friction point for business owners. If an organization is paying a massive multi-million-dollar annual premium to outsource their email hosting, CRM databases, and file storage to a trillion-dollar tech behemoth like Microsoft or Google, shouldn't those companies be doing the security for us? They have infinitely more security engineers than a mid-sized business. Why is data security still our problem?
Because the cloud provider has no context for your specific business operations. They provide a mathematically secure digital vault, but they do not know who your employees are. They do not know that John from marketing should not be allowed to read the highly confidential HR payroll folder. They do not know if you intentionally wanted a specific file to be publicly downloadable or if it was an accident. If you take that highly secure vault, leave the heavy steel door wide open, and publish the combination on public internet forum, that is not a failure of the cloud provider's infrastructure. That is a catastrophic misconfiguration on your end.
And the sources emphasize that misconfigurations are arguably the single largest threat in cloud environments today. We aren't dealing with sophisticated zero-day exploits. We are dealing with human error at scale.
The scale and complexity are the enemy. The texts detail the persistent issue of Amazon S3 buckets, which are essentially cloud storage folders being left publicly accessible. A developer might temporarily set a bucket containing millions of rows of unencrypted customer data to public during a late-night troubleshooting session to see if a web application can connect to it. They fix the bug, but they forget to revert the permissions back to private.
And because it's public, automated scanners find it, and the data is quietly downloaded by threat actors. No hacking required, just taking what was left out in the open.
Furthermore, Organizations need to realize that SaaS providers are, by definition, third-party vendors. You are entrusting your most sensitive data to another company's servers.
You have to scrutinize them with the same rigor you would apply to any vendor handling your intellectual property. You cannot just click accept terms and conditions and assume they are secure. The texts stress the necessity of aggressive contract negotiations. Organizations must carefully review the limitations of liability clauses. Many SaaS vendors will attempt to cap their financial liability in the event of a breach to the amount you paid them for the software subscription over the past 12 months.
But if that SaaS vendor suffers a catastrophic breach and exposes millions of your customers' highly sensitive records, the financial cost to your organization, regulatory fines, class action lawsuits, mandatory credit monitoring, and reputational destruction will be exponentially higher than your $5,000 annual subscription fee.
This is why the sources recommend demanding that critical SaaS vendors carry robust cyber liability insurance and ensuring the contract stipulates they are financially responsible for the costs of notifying your victims in the event their infrastructure is compromised.
You also need verifiable proof that their security culture is mature. You cannot rely on their marketing brochures. The texts recommend requiring independent audit reports before signing a contract. Specifically, you should request a SOC2 Type 2 report or look for compliance with the Cloud Security Alliance STAR program.
What exactly does an independent audit, like a SOC2 Type 2, verify?
A SOC2 Type 2 audit means an independent certified accounting or security firm has spent months actively observing and testing the vendor's security controls. They verify that the vendor actually encrypts data at rest, that they actually perform background checks on their engineers, and that their incident response plans are functional. It proves their security isn't just theoretical, it is operational.
But even if the vendors are perfectly secure, managing the internal permissions across dozens of these platforms is overwhelming. An average remote worker might use Slack, Salesforce, Google Drive, Asana, and Zendesk every single day. How does an IT team maintain visibility across a multi-cloud environment to prevent those misconfigurations we talked about?
Manual auditing is impossible at that scale. The sources point to the deployment of CSPM cloud security posture management tools.
Let's look at how CSPM tools mechanistically solve the visibility problem.
CSPM tools are designed to sit above your fragmented cloud environments. They use APIs to plug directly into your AWS accounts, your Azure environments, and your major SaaS applications. Once connected, they continuously automatically scan the configurations of all those platforms against established security frameworks and compliance benchmarks.
So they act as an automated auditor.
Yes, they will immediately alert the security team if they detect an anomaly. They will flag that public S3 bucket the moment the permissions change. They will alert you if you have API keys that haven't been rotated in over 90 days, which is a major risk for credential stuffing. They will highlight administrator accounts that somehow have MFA disabled. They provide a unified dashboard of your entire cloud attack surface.
Because in the cloud, visibility is security. You cannot secure what you cannot see, and you cannot manually monitor an infrastructure that changes by the minute.
We have covered an immense amount of technical and architectural ground today, moving from the psychology of the remote worker all the way to the architecture of multi-cloud environments.
To make this actionable, we need to distill this deep dive into concrete steps. The goal is for you to be able to pause this audio, look at your organization's current setup, and immediately identify what needs to be fixed. Let's summarize the core takeaways from the source material.
Step 1. Change your architectural mindset. Assume the external network is inherently hostile. The physical perimeter is gone. You must stop relying on the corporate firewall to protect remote laptops. Implement mobile application management, or MA, to create encrypted, sandboxed bubbles for corporate data on personal BYOD devices, ensuring that personal malware cannot cross-contaminate corporate assets.
Step 2. Radically upgrade your identity security. The password is a broken mechanism, and SMS text messages are vulnerable to SIM-jacking. Move your entire organization to strong multi-factor authentication. Use authenticator apps as the bare minimum baseline for all employees, and issue phishing-resistant hardware keys, like YubiKeys, to your IT administrators and executives who have access to highly sensitive data.
Step 3. Address the human vulnerability. Your remote employees are isolated and lack informal peer verification. You must run continuous, psychologically realistic mock phishing and vishing simulations. Use tools that create immediate, in-the-moment educational feedback when an employee clicks a malicious link, teaching them how to spot spoofed domains and artificial urgency.
Step 4. Transition away from legacy remote access. Traditional virtual private networks operate on a flawed moat and castle model that grants dangerous lateral movement once an attacker is inside. Move toward granular zero-trust network access architectures that continuously verify the user's identity and the health posture of their specific device for every single session, granting access only to the specific application they need.
And step 5. Deeply understand your obligations under the shared responsibility model in the cloud. The cloud provider guarantees the physical servers, but you are entirely responsible for securing the data, configuring the network, and managing the identities. Deploy cloud security posture management tools to automatically scan your multi-cloud environments for the misconfigurations that lead to catastrophic data leaks.
We've laid out the strategies for securing the present reality of hybrid work. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something to explore on your own that builds on the trajectory of everything we've discussed today. As remote work solidifies as the permanent norm for knowledge workers, and as cloud applications become entirely self-contained, capable of running complex workloads entirely within a web browser, will the concept of a dedicated physical corporate laptop eventually disappear altogether?
It is a profound architectural question. If the physical device is untrusted by default, and only the mathematically verified identity matters, why not?
Could the future of work simply be a secure, biometric locked cloud bubble? Imagine a virtual workspace that exists entirely in the cloud. You could safely sit down at literally any device in the world, a kiosk in a hotel lobby, a friend's borrowed tablet, or even a smart TV, authenticate with a hardware key and a biometric scan, and instantly access your secure corporate desktop, knowing that the moment you log off, absolutely zero data remains on that local hardware.
If the principles of zero trust and cloud isolation reach their logical extreme, the physical hardware becomes entirely commoditized and irrelevant. It simply becomes the dumb pane of glass used to view the secure cloud enclave. We're not fully there yet, as legacy applications still require local processing, but the architecture is undeniably pulling us in that direction.
That wraps up this episode of SecOps, powered by Cyber Viewpoint. Remote work isn't going away, and neither are the attackers who've adapted to exploit it. Secure your connections, train your people, and remember, in a distributed world, every employee is the perimeter. Until next time, patch your router, enable MFA, and please, please stop using the hotel Wi-Fi for your bank login.